I don't know exactly which moment everything between me and Vance crossed the line from roommates into something else. All I know is that after that night, everything quietly changed. There was no announcement, no clear agreement, just small shifts. But they were enough for me to realize I wasn't standing alone in this mess of feelings anymore. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Pale light slipped through the curtains, and the first thing I did was look over at the other bed. Vance was still asleep, one arm draped across his forehead, the blanket pushed down to his waist. I lay there for a few seconds just watching him, not for any specific reason, just to make sure last night had been real, that the conversation, the touch, the acceptance hadn't disappeared when the sun came up. I was about to turn away when Vance stirred, then opened his eyes. His gaze met mine instantly, as if he'd already known I was looking. "You staring at me?" he asked, voice still hoarse from sleep. I immediately turned my face away. "No," I answered. How many times had I lied about this now? Vance gave a small laugh, not calling me out. He just stretched, then sat up. "You got class today?" "Yeah, but late," I said, still not daring to look back at him. "Me too," he replied. There was a brief silence before he added, "Hey, Gannon." I turned toward him. "Yeah?" Vance looked at me, his eyes no longer avoiding mine like before. "About last night." My heart tightened instantly. "Yeah?" I asked carefully. He shrugged lightly. "I don't want to make you feel weird. If you want everything to stay the same as before, I'm okay with that." Those words should have made me relieved. It was the safe exit I'd always looked for. But instead, I felt a hollow ache, like he was opening the door to back out, and I didn't want that. "Not this time. I don't want it to stay the same," I said, before I could overthink it. Vance froze, clearly surprised. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath. For the first time in my life, I didn't run. "I don't want to pretend like nothing happened," I said, looking straight at him. Because it did. The air in the room thickened. A few seconds passed with neither of us speaking. Then Vance smiled soft this time, not teasing. It was relief. "Good," he said. Just one word, but it was enough for me to understand. I wasn't the only one feeling this way. We didn't rush to define what this was. No labels, no rules. We simply stopped avoiding it, and somehow that felt more intimate than any clear confession ever could. The days that followed moved to a new rhythm, familiar yet strange. Vance still climbed into my bed every night, but it was no longer just to watch a movie. It became a habit that needed no excuse. We still shared one Netflix account, still fought over who got to pick the film, still argued about stupid shit like who finished the snacks. But woven between all those normal things were moments that hadn't existed before, like when our hands brushed and neither of us pulled away, like when Vance unconsciously rested his head on my shoulder while watching a movie, like when I realized I no longer tensed up every time he was near me. Instead, I felt comfortable in a way that felt dangerously good. One evening, while we were halfway through a terrible movie, Vance suddenly closed the laptop. "This movie sucks," he said. I laughed. "You finally admit it?" I knew from the start, he shrugged. But I wasn't watching for the movie. I turned to look at him, my heartbeat skipping. "Then what were you watching for?" Vance didn't answer right away. He just looked at me longer than usual, his eyes no longer hiding anything. He said simply. No drama, no flourish. But it was enough to make everything in my head stop for a second. I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. This wasn't vague signals anymore. This was clear. "Don't say stuff like that," I murmured, my voice smaller than I wanted. "Why?" he asked, frowning slightly. "Because..." I trailed off, unable to find a logical reason other than the truth I was still trying to avoid. "Because it makes everything complicated." Vance looked at me, unflinching. "Everything's already complicated," he said. "You're just pretending it's simple." I stayed quiet because he was right again. And I was starting to get tired of always being the one in control, the one keeping distance, the one pretending not to feel anything. "So what do you want?" I asked. This time I was the one pushing. Vance didn't answer immediately. He just reached up and gently touched my cheek, slow, giving me every chance to pull away. But I didn't. I stayed still, letting him move closer. "I want to try," he said, voice low. that exit. My heart pounded not from fear, but because I wanted it too. Maybe I'd regret it. Maybe everything would fall apart. But if I didn't try, I'd always wonder what if, and I hated that feeling more than anything. I took a deep breath and nodded. Yeah, I said, and that was probably the stupidest and most right decision I'd ever made. Vance didn't smile, didn't say anything else. He just leaned in, slow, painfully slow, like every centimeter mattered. And when his lips touched mine, nothing else mattered anymore. I had thought the moment our lips met would be like in the movies, explosive, intense, the kind where the whole world disappears and it's just the two of us. But the truth was different. It was slower, more real, and far more dangerous. Because I felt every single detail. Vance's south breath so close I could sense his breathing getting as unsteady as mine. His lips were warm, unhurried, as if waiting for me to decide whether to keep going. For one tiny second, I thought about pulling back, about all the things that could go wrong, that could break. But then my hand unconsciously grabbed his shirt and pulled him closer like an answer I didn't need to speak out loud. And Vance understood. He always understood faster than I expected. The kiss deepened, became clearer, no longer a test but a confirmation and admission that couldn't be taken back. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us spoke right away. Our faces stayed close enough that I could see his eyes flicker, not with hesitation, but with something real. So that it then, Vance whispered. I frowned. That what? He smiled softly. We can't go back now. Those words should have scared me. Instead, something inside me settled, like I had finally stopped running. Yeah, I answered, voice quiet but certain. No going back. And this time, when we kissed again, there was no hesitation. It felt so natural it was terrifying, like we had been waiting for this moment for a long time without daring to admit it. That night we didn't go further than kissing. Not because we lacked the chance, but because both of us understood that what had just happened was already big enough. Big enough to change everything. And maybe we needed time to catch up with ourselves. Vance stayed on my bed. He didn't say much, just lay beside me, shoulder against shoulder, his hand occasionally finding mine like a new habit forming. And I didn't pull away. There was no reason to anymore. Gannon, he called when the lights were off. Yeah. You regret it? The question hung in the dark, and I knew he was asking seriously, not to test me, but to know where he stood. I thought for a few seconds, not because I didn't know the answer, but because I wanted to be sure I was telling the truth. No, I said at last. And for the first time, I wasn't lying. Vance didn't reply right away, but I felt his hand squeeze mine gently enough for me to understand. The next morning, everything wasn't as awkward as I had feared. No forced silence, no avoiding eyes, just a quiet change, but an obvious one, like we had stepped into a different version of ourselves. Vance still teased me when I slept in late. I still grumbled when he took up the whole bed. We still argued about who ate the last snack. But woven in between were touches that were no longer accidental, glances that lasted longer than normal, smiles that only the two of us understood. And the strangest part was, neither of us named it. No boyfriend, no dating. Just us. One afternoon in the library, pretending to study but neither of us actually focusing, Vance leaned toward me. Hey, he said softly. There's a party in the room next door tonight. I frowned. So? You want to go? He asked. I looked at him for a few seconds. You want to go? Vance shrugged. I don't like crowded places, but going with you would be okay. His answer caught me off guard, not because of the words, but because of how he said them. Straightforward, no circling. Like going with me was enough reason to change his mind. I didn't know whether to feel happy or worried. Yeah. We can go, I said, trying to sound casual. But inside, I was already imagining every possible scenario. Dorm parties weren't chill. They were loud, crowded, full of beer and perfume, flashing lights, and most importantly, lots of eyes. And for the first time since things changed between me and Vance, I realized something I had been able to pretend not to think about before. We didn't just live in this room. We lived in the world outside, where things weren't as simple as they were between the two of us, where a hand touch could be noticed, a glance could be misinterpreted, and a relationship like ours wasn't he always welcomed. Gannon, Vance called, pulling me out of my thoughts. You overthinking again. I exhaled, smiling faintly. Maybe. He tilted his head. If you don't want to go, we don't have to, he said, no pressure in his voice. I don't need that stuff. I looked at him, and in that moment, I realized I wasn't afraid of the party. I was afraid of facing the outside world with him, afraid of having to decide what we were. When we weren't inside the safety of this room anymore, I took a deep breath and shook my head. No, I want to go, I said, no hesitation this time. Vance smiled. Good. I didn't know what that night would bring. But I knew one thing for sure, everything between me and Vance was about to be tested. Not by us, but by the world around us. I thought I was mentally prepared for that party. But the second we stepped out of our room and heard the music blasting down the hallway, the loud laughter, the smell of beer and perfume mixing in the air, I knew I had underestimated it. Not because I had never been to parties like this before, but because this time, I wasn't going alone. Vance walked beside me, his shoulder almost brushing mine every time the hallway got crowded. Just that tiny detail was enough to make me fully aware that everything had changed, that every step, every bit of distance, every glance could mean something other people didn't need to know. But I knew. We stopped in front of the door next door, where the music was loudest and the flashing lights spilled out. Ready? Vance asked, turning to me. I shrugged. Let us just go in. He nodded and pushed the door open. The atmosphere inside hit us immediately, hot, noisy, and packed. At least 20 people crammed into a room that wasn't very big. Some were dancing, some clustered together talking, and almost everyone turned to look when the door opened. Just for a second, but it was enough to make me feel like I had stepped onto an unwanted stage. Vance didn't seem bothered at all. He walked in first, pulling me along like it was the most natural thing in the world. Yo, Vance, a guy's voice called out. A tall dude in the corner waved. Vance nodded back. Your friend? I asked quietly. Yeah, same gym class, he answered, then turned to me. Want something to drink? I shook my head. Not yet. Vance shrugged. I'll just grab water. He headed toward the table, leaving me standing in the middle of a crowd I didn't really know. In that moment I felt lost. Not because I didn't fit in places like this, but because I didn't know where I was supposed to stand. When he wasn't beside me. You a friend of Vance's? A girl's voice asked beside me. I turned. A blonde girl holding a plastic cup smiled at me friendly. Yeah, I said. I'm Gannon. I'm Lisa, she replied, offering her hand. I shook it, trying to act normal. Vance rarely brings anyone to these things, Lisa said, taking a sip. You must be special. Her words made me pause, not because of what she said, but because of how she said it, like she was observing, evaluating. I smiled lightly. Just an exception today, I guess. Lisa tilted her head, looked at me a few more seconds, then smiled. Maybe, she said, but her eyes still held a hint of curiosity. Before I could say anything else, Vance came back and handed me a bottle of water. For you, he said, standing a little closer than necessary like a reflex. Thanks, I replied. In that moment I realized when Vance was next to me, everything was so much easier. Lisa glanced between us, her eyes sliding over us subtly, then smiled. I'll leave you guys, she said. Enjoy. And she walked away, leaving a small silence between me and Vance. What did she say? Vance asked. I shrugged. Just asked who I was. He nodded, didn't press, but I could tell he was paying attention, not in a controlling way, but caring. Time passed. We stood close, talking about random things, laughing sometimes, quiet sometimes. And gradually, I started to forget the initial tension, until a small thing happened that pulled me back to reality. A guy who had clearly had a few too many drinks walked over and clapped Vance on the shoulder. Yo, where you been the last few days? He said loudly. Vance frowned slightly. Busy studying. Bullshit. The guy laughed, then glanced at me. Who's this? My friend, Vance said shortly. Friend? The guy repeated, narrowing his eyes like he was searching for something. Then he grinned. Cool. But his tone wasn't entirely friendly. I didn't say anything, just stood there, feeling clearly that his look wasn't simple curiosity, it was sharper, more uncomfortable. "Anyway, I'm gonna grab more beer," he said, then turned away. But before he left, he glanced back once more, this time unmistakably. Vance exhaled softly. "Ignore him," he said. I nodded. "Yeah." But inside, I was already tensing up. Not because of one stranger, but because of how the world reacted to things it didn't understand. We stayed a little longer, but the atmosphere no longer felt the same, at least not for me. Every touch, every bit of space between me and Vance suddenly felt more noticeable, like someone was watching, waiting, and I hated that feeling. "Want to leave?" Vance asked quietly, like he could read my mind. I looked at him and nodded. "Yeah." No need for more explanation. We left the party, stepping into the quieter hallway. The music faded behind us, and only when our own door closed did I realize I had been holding my breath the whole time. "You okay?" Vance asked, turning to me. I breathed out. "Yeah, just a bit." I stopped, not sure how to describe it. Vance nodded like he understood. "I know," he said, and this time he didn't hesitate. His hand touched mine right there in the hallway, no hiding, no rush, just a light hold, a small gesture, but enough to make everything around us stop mattering. "We don't have to hide," he said, voice low but firm. I looked down at our hands, then back at him. My heart was still racing, but not from fear anymore. "Yeah," I said, and this time, I believed it a little more. Not completely, but enough to keep walking. With him, we didn't let go of each other's hands even when we reached our room, even though the hallway was empty and no one was watching. Vance kept holding my hand like it needed no reason, and I couldn't find a reason to pull away either. The door closed behind us. The noise from the party was completely cut off. Only the familiar quiet remained, but this time it wasn't the safe silence I used to hide in. It was a space where everything between us became clearer. No one else, no eyes except ours, and no more reasons to pretend. Vance slowly let go of my hand, but he didn't step away. He just stood there, looking at me, as if waiting for me to say something, do something, or simply not turn away. "You've been quiet since we got back," he said, voice low. Not pushing, just observing. I leaned my back against the door and let out a long breath. "I've been thinking," I admitted. "About what?" I smiled faintly, not really happy. "About what the hell we're doing." Vance frowned, but not in annoyance. "What do you mean?" I looked up at him. "I mean, inside this room, everything feels easy," I said slowly, choosing each word. "But out there, it doesn't." Vance was quiet for a few seconds, then nodded. "Yeah." He didn't deny it, didn't try to soften it. He just acknowledged it, and that made me keep going. "I don't want to have to hide," I said, "but I also don't know if I'm strong enough to face all of it." The words left my mouth and I felt a little lighter, like I had finally said the thing I was afraid of. Vance stepped closer one step, not touching me yet, just close enough for me to feel his presence. "I don't need you to be ready right now," he said, voice slow and sure. "I just need you to stop pretending you don't want this." My chest tightened because he had hit exactly the spot I'd been avoiding. I didn't answer immediately because I knew if I told the truth, there would be no turning back. "I do want it," I said at last, almost whispering. "I want you." The air seemed to pause for a second. Vance didn't smile, didn't tease. He just looked at me, his eyes deeper than usual. "Good," he whispered. Then he reached up, touched the back of my neck, and gently pulled me closer. This time the kiss wasn't an experiment or hesitation. It was certain, clear, like an answer both of us had been waiting for. I stopped thinking, stopped analyzing, stopped being afraid. I just felt. My hand gripped his shirt, pulling him closer, like I was scared that if I let go everything would disappear. And maybe part of me still was. The kiss went on slow, deep, until we both had to pull apart to breathe, foreheads touching, breaths mixing. "You're still thinking too much," Vance said, voice hoarse. I laughed softly. "I know." "Then stop thinking," he said, as if it were the easiest thing in the world. And maybe, for him it was, but for me it was a whole process. A war between the part of me that always tried to stay in control and the feelings I couldn't turn off. "Stay here," Vance said, pulling me toward the bed. Not asking, just leading. And this time, I didn't resist. That night we lay beside each other. No longer just shoulder to shoulder, but closer, more intimate. Our hands laced together naturally, like we'd been doing it for years. Neither of us said much, but we didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said in other ways, and for the first time since this all began, I wasn't afraid when I thought about tomorrow. Not because I knew it would be easy, but because I knew I wouldn't have to face it alone. The days after that weren't completely peaceful. The world outside still existed, with its stares, its words, its prejudices I couldn't control. There were moments I hesitated, moments I wanted to pull back, but every time Vance was there, not pushing, not dragging, just standing beside me, close enough for me to know I could move forward if I wanted to. And little by little, I learned not to let fear make decisions for me. One evening, we were sitting on the bed again, laptop open, the familiar Netflix account on screen. Vance leaned toward me. He said, "All of this started because of this account." I smiled. "Yeah, sounds stupid when you say it." "Yeah," he laughed along. "But I wouldn't change it." I looked at him. "Change what?" "Anything that led to this," he said, voice light but certain. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the screen, then back at him. And in that moment, I understood. Not everything has to start with something big. Sometimes a small reason, a simple excuse, is enough to pull two people together, enough to change an entire story. I rested my head on his shoulder, no longer overthinking, no longer afraid. Just there, with him. And for the first time, I felt like I didn't need to hide anything. Didn't need to become a different version of myself. I could just be me. And for me, that was enough. Our story didn't end there. It wasn't a perfect movie ending because real life isn't that simple. But it began there. From a shared account, from a hand touch, from a decision not to go back. And if anyone asked me whether I would do it all over again, I wouldn't hesitate to answer yes. Even knowing it would be complicated, difficult, that there would be times I'd want to run, I would still choose that path. Because at the end of it is Vance. And for me, that's enough.